Hello, croeso. Welcome to the Senedd Sources podcast, where we take you inside Welsh politics. I'm Ollie Cole, and also with me on the podcast, Jo Kiernan, former advisor to First Ministers Rhodri Morgan and Carwyn Jones, before that a journalist, and now at Cavendish Consulting. Hello, Jo, and Happy New Year.
Oh, festive felicitations to you both.
And also with us, Craig Lawton, who was a political advisor and candidate for the Welsh Conservative, now working at Grasshopper Communications. Hello, Craig, and Happy New Year to you as well.
I'm just going to say Happy New Year.
Good. No alliteration from Craig. Well, blwyddyn newydd i pawb. And thank you for listening over the festive season if you haven't. And the great thing about podcasting is that if you haven't necessarily had time in between all the dinners and presents and cards to listen to the podcast, you can catch up before sort of work comes calling. But of course, politics never stops. So on the podcast today, we will be talking to Labour member of the Senedd for Llanelli and former Minister in the Welsh Government, Lee Waters. And along the way, we have a WhatsApp number, and it's great for sending your comments and questions as you're listening, and then we'll read them out in the next episode. We'll also use it when you come and join us for our live recordings. The number you need, 0333 404 6507. Start your message with the word Senedd, or you can email us with your questions and comments as well. The email address is hello@seneddsources.com. So, without further ado, a big welcome to Lee Waters, the member of the Senedd for Llanelli, a former minister in the Welsh Labour government. Welcome to Senedd Sources.
Well, it's lovely to be here. It's a little incestuous, one podcast interviewing somebody from another podcast, but such is life.
Very much so, very much so. Thank you very much for giving us your time. Now, I want to start sort of in terms of the way I introduced you, because you have served in the Welsh Government. You've been a minister. You're a minister under Mark Drakeford. And I wonder what you think now in terms of what Mark Drakeford's vision for Wales and the government looked like with you in it, and what Welsh Labour's vision for Wales and the Welsh Government with Ollie Morgan as the leader. Sort of compare and contrast.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I was looking back, what's it been, 2 years now, I think, and it just seems like a far more stable era, how things have changed so quickly and how much more unstable things have become, not just in Wales, but in the context we're in. To think that we'd have a Labour government with Prime Minister that's more unpopular than Boris Johnson at his nadir is quite extraordinary. And I think it's a sign of the pressurised times that we're living in, and that's clearly felt by the Welsh Government as well. And I think looking back to the time of Mark Drakeford, he was certainly a First Minister with a very clear idea of what he wanted to achieve. But the fact, I think, things have come undone the way they have has got to reflect on those of us who were in government at that time as well. So I don't think we can, we've got to bear some responsibility for what's come since then as well, I think.
It's fascinating to me that you sort of say now as a particularly, mad era of politics and a sort of more unstable era, when you think that actually what the Labour Welsh Government went through with you as a minister was in part COVID, Brexit, all of these huge life-defining political events that we thought were going to sort of change everything. And actually this is now you're seeing as the period of actual instability.
Yeah, we've gone through, in my been a decade in the Senedd, we were straight into Brexit. So in that decade, we've gone through a financial crash, a plague, and a political crisis. And we're still standing, but we are battered and bruised by it.
And Jo, you've been there. We've spoken on the podcast before about you dealing with some really tumultuous times in the Welsh Labour Party and sort of trying to define that leadership. How do you see sort of where we're at now and where we've been?
I think every Senedd termly has its turmoil, doesn't it? There's always something that threatens to derail, although I'm not sure that I ever dealt with anything as big as COVID, for example. But on that vein, I just wanted to take you back to 2016 when you were knocking doors in Llanelli. I remember door knocking for you, actually. And I do remember you didn't take anything for granted. You weren't at all convinced that, you were going to win this marginal seat, which I thought was a very healthy attitude to have. But looking back at yourself then, do you think there was a certain naivety to what was to come, both, in becoming a minister or role as backbencher, and just the sheer hard work and difficulties of being an elected member? Because I think that's changed massively as well from 2016 to
Yeah,
now.
I probably need a bit more time, distance between it happening to reflect on it to properly answer the question, Joe, because I'm still in it. But I've definitely been a pessimist. I've never assumed I was going to win. It was a highly marginal seat, one that we'd never any candidate won more than once. So I think it was appropriate not to take it for granted. And I ended up winning by, what was it, 282 votes or something like that. So I won it, I think, through just sheer hard graft. So I think it was that relentlessness that was responsible for me winning. But I didn't think I'd win again either. And in a sense, that gave me a sense of liberation because I didn't think this was some kind of a seat for life. I took the attitude of, oh, I'm probably not going to get a second term, so there's no point trying to play a conventional game here of keep my head down and say the right thing and hope I get preferment. I'm here to try and make a mark with the time I've got, and I can't assume I'll be here for more than one term. And I found that quite freeing, really. But in terms of your question of how naive I was, well, I suppose, I was as well prepared for elected office as you can be, really. I'd worked in politics, I'd worked in journalism, I'd worked in policy. I had a pretty realistic idea of what political life involved. But even that doesn't prepare you for not just the ferocity of it, but for the psychological shift of being in it yourself, of being not just the person who's advising or covering, but the person whose name is on the ballot paper, whose name is on the poster. And I just found that really disconcerting, just on a human level. I hated it. I really hated being the person who people assume they then knew, and because they didn't. And I found that perhaps the hardest thing to come to terms with, and I still haven't come to terms with that. It doesn't sit easily with me. I don't like being, in the front, bizarrely, but that's the deal.
Just want to pick up on something you said about how freeing it was that, not having expectation of being re-elected, because I consider you quite a brave minister in the time that you were in office. And I don't think bravery is something that every politician or every minister exhibits
You
necessarily.
mean Sir Humphrey way,
but it does.
Sure, the bravery is a backhanded compliment.
I mean it in terms of taking decisions that can prove incredibly unpopular, but doing what you think is right. And you kind of paid a price for that, didn't you? And you used the word ferocity. You've experienced that as well. And Kirsty Williams, the former education minister, spoke very movingly a few months ago just about how difficult ministerial life could be, the abuse that had been directed at her and the impact on the family. And I'm assuming nothing can prepare you really for that. And how did you cope with it?
Well, I think the thing that struck me, and one of the things I did from the get-go, I think one of the reasons why I won my seat in 2016 was the way I used social media. And Facebook in 2016 was a very different place from what it is today. But I used a lot of photography and imagery to project sort of a positive vision. I boosted posts to get a reach which you'd never get just from knocking doors. And it worked. And having set that tone, I wanted to continue it. So I was very, very engaged with people on social media, both Twitter and Facebook, answering questions, responding, replying, taking part in discussions. And that, it takes a lot out of you, but for me, you need to be accountable. You need to be accessible. That was a type of politics I wanted to practice. And that's draining. And then when COVID came along, that sort of put rocket boosters under it, really. And because I was a minister in those meetings day by day, I knew a lot about the rules. So this is why I can never understand the Boris Johnson defence. Oh, I didn't understand what the rules were when he was making the rules. We understood what the rules were because we were making the rules. And so I did a lot of, in the margins of meeting, answering questions from people, along the lines of, can I use the Tesco in Bont, or do I have to go to the one in Llanelli because the 5 mile route? So all this stuff, and that, took a lot out of me, but I was very accessible, and that definitely, I think, helped me win again in 2021. But then 20 mile an hour came along, and then the Stradey Park incident came along, where a hotel in Llanelli that was commandeered by the Home Office to house asylum seekers and got a very strong local reaction. And that accessibility sort of blew up in my face, really, because there was just nowhere to hide. And it was a pile-on. It wasn't just people in Llanelli asking me questions. It was people from everywhere just heaping on insult and abuse and just a torrent. And that was overwhelming, really. And the thing, we're not punch bags. It's the point I have to say to people, I'm not here for you to just take out your shit on just because you're unhappy about something. I'm a public servant. You wouldn't do this to a doctor or a head teacher. And perhaps they would, actually, and that's perhaps what has changed, because it's not just politicians in the public square who getting this hostility. But I found that very, very difficult, and it chipped away, and it, contributed me feeling really very ill.
So, Lee, I mean, I guess the question that comes to mind for me is, I'm almost go to the point of, would you say you were too genuine on social media? The example I would give is that actually a lot of politicians, you get an impression for what they're like. You meet them in person and they're very different. I get the impression, having done a little bit of work alongside you, that it's the same person, whether you're behind the keyboard or in person. Was that part of the downfall, do you think, or part of a bad decision?
Well, two things. The night of my first election, Helen Mary Jones, I was standing against, who I'd always gone well with, came up to my wife and said, look after him because he's too sensitive for this. And I thought about that a lot, and in many ways she was right. And I think it's, to answer your question, I don't have a very good filter. And Jo will know this.
That's
You don't say.
Yeah, and it's only from having an ADHD diagnosis I now understand why that is. But it is part. People will say about me, he's very honest, or he's authentic, and I think that's meant as a compliment. But in a sense, that's just the way my brain works. I'm not very good at. That's one of the reasons I could never contemplate political leadership, because I'm not manipulative. And I don't mean that as a pejorative. I think you have to be manipulative to be political leader, because you have to reconcile irreconcilable forces, and you have to be able to manage that. And I can't do that. I say what I think, and if I have a view, I give a view, and properly managed. Mark Drakeford, to be fair, said during the COVID cabinets, I played a very valuable role in that. I was the one who was challenging and the one pointing out flaws in argument. I wanted to kick the tyres, and that does test the patience of colleagues quite often. But I think in the proper setting, it's a good thing. But in a political environment, it's certainly it's high wire stuff, isn't it? And I've certainly given honest answers or direct answers or quick answers to things, which have then, I don't think I've been incorrect in what I've said, but they've been indiplomatic, and they've certainly blown up in my face.
I remember meeting you when I was working for the BMA at a Labour conference, and I talked to you about, I said, the BMA actually really supports X, Y, or Z policy that you're bringing forward. And your response to me was, would it be bloody helpful if they told somebody now and then? I was a bit taken aback, but actually, it was one of the frankest discussions. It was one of the frankest discussions I had at that conference, and it's really helpful to know where you stand. I'd much prefer an MS to say, I like this, I do not like this, I'm not going to support it, I will, or you need to do more, than all this talking around the edges, to be fair. So, yeah.
But I think the problem is I have, though, Craig, is that if people who aren't used to me can be quite taken aback by my bluntness from time to time, and that, will sometimes leave people, people have said, he's very arrogant, or he can be obnoxious, and I don't mean to be, but that sometimes is how it manifests itself. But, in the long run, I think it's a quality, but it's, it certainly has its short-term blips. And, the one that's got me in the biggest trouble was 6 months into becoming an economy minister. I said, we don't know what we're doing with the economy, we're just making it as we go along, which, partly a kind of a flippant thing I'd have said when I was running a think tank that you can't say when you're a minister. Didn't think there was a journalist in the room. But my analysis was correct. I stand by my analysis. No government is in control of the economy, and they pretend they are. That was, as a piece of observation, it was fair enough. As a piece of political communication, it was absolutely bloody mad.
Yeah.
Pretty awful. It does beg the question then, Lee, that Given the diagnosis that you mentioned and the toll on your health that sort of the abuse of COVID and 20 mile an hour took, do you think that you were suited now, looking back, to being a politician, or is that just too difficult to say
Well,
now?
what does that mean, though, Jo? What does being a politician mean? What have you got? What's this idea of, being?
There's kind of an
Yeah, I know,
identikit, though,
that's
isn't
the
it? I'm not saying
problem, isn't
that's
it? But
right
I'd
or
never
wrong.
wanted to become that person. I thought if I'm going to do this, having seen the negative sides of politics and having known lots of politicians up close and see how being a politician changes people, not for the good. I thought, I do not want to do that. I can remember when you and I were working together, having lunch with Peter Hain, who I had a lot of time for when he was Europe Minister. And he was a time for our younger viewers will not remember this, but there was a big debate around a European constitution and should we have one or not. And the government line, Blair's line, was absolutely, we do not want to have a referendum on the European constitution. And Hain, as the Europe Minister, was out to bat for this line. And I remember having lunch with him in the cutting edge in Cardiff Bay. And saying to him, well, surely there's a pro-European case for a referendum to remake the case again. And he said, well, that's a very naive position to take. I don't agree with that. And then, it's like 2 weeks later, the Mail had forced Blair to completely about turn on the policy. And all of a sudden, the government committed to having a referendum. And poor old Peter Hain, who'd been spending months giving the line that, of course, as a matter of principle, we shouldn't have a referendum, was then saying, we have to have a referendum. And I thought, well, this kind of reinforces my view that if I do ever go into politics, don't want to be somebody who's constantly trying to read the weather and trying to tack my sails to go with the prevailing wind. Because when the wind changes, you're left looking like a right nana. And I think that's where people get fed up with politicians, because they say the same things, they use the same coded language, they don't answer the question, they obfuscate, and then they end up saying things they don't believe in and having to reverse. I thought, well, I don't want to do that. So back to the point about being liberated in a marginal seat, I thought, well, this is what I think. I also think, and this is my early experience, because I think you'd stopped working in the Senedd when I got there, Jo. But obviously, Carwyn Jones, who you've been working with, was the leader of the party. One of his big policies was an M4 relief road, and I was dead against an M4 relief road and had been for a very long time, and made that clear when I was selected and when I was asked in the election.
I remember it well.
But it was awkward when I was first elected. So I had a dilemma. Do I, my party leader, my manifesto policy is for this thing. Do I just bite my tongue and accept collective responsibility? And I thought, well, bugger that for Game of Soldiers. I think it's wrong. I don't agree with it. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an argument for a different approach. And what I found quite encouraging is that nobody was making an argument for an alternative. So even people who didn't really believe in the M4 relief road had kind of accepted, well, it's going to happen, and weren't making a case for alternative. And I was determined to try and make a case for doing it differently. And I've tried to do that throughout my time in politics. It's not easy. It's not always popular. It doesn't always win me friends. But I just think, and I felt it at the time, the model of a typical politician is not what people want. People respect people who are willing. There's this line about people don't believe in ideas, but they believe in people who believe in ideas. And even though people don't agree with me, and I haven't agreed with many of the positions I've taken, there is a residual respect for somebody at least willing to say what they think, and that is rare, and it's rare for a reason, because it's bloody difficult and it's uncomfortable, and it's not a recipe for success or peace of mind in politics. So I'm not recommending. I'm not being arrogant and say, more people should do what I've done. That's really the only way I've been able to operate. And I think ultimately it's a healthy way to operate, but it's not for everyone's taste.
I'm always fascinated as a political journalist that sort of everyone screams out that what they want is authentic politicians until the moment someone can't name their top 3 Taylor Swift songs, or how much how much a pint of milk is, or says they haven't seen a film about something, and then suddenly it's like, oh, you're not down with it. And then similarly, I find the current phenomenon of the one person that voters seem to say, oh, you could go for a pint in a pub with is Nigel Farage, whereas he's sort of possibly the furthest removed from, say, a member of the public in Llanelli or somewhere similar to that. So it's always sort of been fascinating to me, that specific phenomenon. Now, you said something just a little earlier that I found interesting about putting your name on the ballot paper for the first time, your name being on decisions as a minister for the first time. I spoke not too long ago to Hilary Cass, who did the gender clinic review for the UK government.
Yeah.
And she was saying almost the worst thing that could have happened in terms of that review was that it was called the Cass Review, because it meant that everybody, piled every opinion and thought and prejudgment onto her, rather than the review team, the group of civil servants who were helping her, the research that she was actually looking at, the rest of it. Do you find still having your name up there next to, a Facebook post, a tweet, a piece of journalism, quite a terrifying thing to do? Or have you sort of gotten a bit more used to your name being thrown around now and try not to actually search your own name, I suppose?
Well, I think two slightly different points at play there. One is I've got no problem putting my name next to an argument I'm in favour of. I've got, got no problem of fronting a policy or being accountable for a course of action that I advocate, for an idea. I'm absolutely fine with that. The bit I'm uncomfortable with is just on a human level and maybe this is the Welsh context of nobody liking a show off or knowing your place or knocking above yourself. I don't like this idea that people think that I think I'm a big I am. So having my picture on a poster, to me, is deeply embarrassing and really uncomfortable, and that's the bit I hate. I remember when I first became a minister, having to go and unveil a plaque or something, and I'm just dying. I just thought, why the hell should I unveil up? I just felt like a right wally. It was really embarrassing. It was horrible. And I'm going to
Can I just jump in there, Leah, to say just how different you are from Cadwyn Jones? You say you can't even. The point that you made earlier about not being able to be a leader because you might object to seeing your face on a poster. I remember going to a conference in Llandudno with Cadwyn when he was First Minister, and they had this 30, 40-foot poster of him. Oh, you've never seen anyone so cock a hoop. So from that perspective, you were right to rule out that next career.
I would say, though,
I can remember my first ministerial visit when I was took on the climate change brief, and it was Clean Air Day in Newport, remember? And I got along, and they'd put a real big razzmatazz on them. I was just dying inside. There was an electric bin lorry. There was an electric bus. There was school children. There was the mayor. There must have been about 60 people there just for me. And I was just dying. I was just excruciating. And I remember the managing director of the bus company had produced a large framed picture with my name inscribed on it of a new electric bus outside the new hospital in the Grange with a rainbow in the background. And he presented me this, and I just felt so embarrassed. And back to my lack of filter point, I can remember just looking at this thing, not knowing what to say, just wanting the ground to swallow me up, and saying, "Oh, there's a picture of a bus, a rainbow, and a hospital." Just what I've always wanted. And he looked really awkward. And I just thought, what an absolute arsehole. Why did you say that for? There was a guy doing a nice gesture. Why don't you just smile and wave and say thanks very much? But I just felt so awkward by the whole thing.
Does that explain why the Rapid Housing Review genuinely is called the Rapid Housing Review? Because I was expecting it to be the Lee Waters Housing Review. I've been serious now, but that maybe explains it. And I was actually really pleasantly surprised, Lee, when I reached out to you when you were doing that review. And I said, how can people feed into it? And a lot of people would have said, here's the secretariat, or talk to me. And you said, here's 3 or 4 different people that are key to it. You can talk to all of them. And I thought that was actually really helpful. And that, I think, goes a lot to explain some of the points that you've just made.
Well, I just, if I'm given a task, I want to do the task as well as I can. And I really, I like these deep dives I've been doing because they're about kicking into an issue and really getting underneath and coming up with practical solutions. I find that really interesting. I'm not interested in standing on ceremony or feeling like the important person in the room. I find that's a waste of time and energy. I'm much more let's just get our heads together and solve the problem.
Well, Lee, talking
make
there
me a
about
really terrible politician. Back to Joe's point.
I'm noting down, by the way, that it's a good start to 2026. So we've had the fastest, most precise answer to a question from a politician on this podcast, which is, can I just say that you're nothing like Carwyn Jones? The answer being yes, was unbelievably quick. So well done on that. We're just talking about being, having your name on things, having your name sort of thrown around quite heavily. I just want to bring us sort of up to speed and up to date to a thing that your name has appeared quite prominently on in the last few weeks, and this is this letter to the Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and a sort of warning shot to UK Labour in terms of how they're treating Wales. Look, we've all read it. We're all aware of the language of it. What was the point of it from your point of view?
Well, I heard your reflections on it when it came out, and you all thought this was really bad politics and very unhelpful.
I'm not sure we did say
really
that,
unhelpful
actually.
just before an election and inexplicable.
Thought you were right,
though. Well, being right is not enough in my experience, Craig.
True.
But I back to the point earlier. What is the point of politics? For me, it's about changing things, about making an argument. It's not about accepting the status quo and then taking your part in a play. And so, there's been a lot of discontent since the general election about the way that the UK government was treating the devolution settlement, and that's been suppressed and it's been behind closed doors. And, we all wanted to give Eluned Morgan a chance to establish her strategy and establish her relationships. I think we reached the point where it was quite clear that the UK government, this was a one-way relationship as far as devolution was concerned. And there was a genuine sense of discontent. In the whole group, really, about it. People will take different tactics of how to express this. But I don't think we should just, for the sake of partnership in power, some kind of contrived unity, we should bite our tongue on these things. There's a bigger picture here. I've just given a lecture in Aberystwyth University a couple of weeks back, my old politics department, looking at the 30-year span of devolution I've been involved in. And it was quite useful exercise because it makes you step back. And through all our frustration, and I am hugely frustrated, we've come an awful long way in an awful long time. We've established institutions. We've started to develop and grow a political culture. We've reshaped the way devolution is seen as being, a very marginal, elite-level preoccupation to one that is now, I'm not sure I'd use the word settled will, but the sense of this, the strong consensus of the majority of people. That hasn't happened by accident. That's happened because people are being willing to make an argument that, Ron Davies, Rodney Morgan, Carwyn Jones, Mark Drakeford, this has been a hard-fought battle. And I'm just not prepared to sit back and let that just be unravelled because calling it out publicly is politically inconvenient. There's a longer-term battle here, and it's important that the tradition in Welsh Labour, who believes strongly in devolution and in protecting it and in advancing it, makes its argument and doesn't just by default step back because it's politically inconvenient. Let that be unravelled. I just think it's wrong.
How significant is Mark Drakeford's intervention at the weekend as sort of a former First Minister, now Finance Minister, saying that the Internal Market Act should be scrapped? Short shrift, unsurprisingly, from UK government on that.
One thing I've never tried to do, Jo, as a former journalist, is just fall into the political trap of complaining about the way the media works, because I understand the way the media works, and the media works the way the media works. And media likes novelty and it likes controversy. And so anything that can be presented as a row is presented as a row. And in the very neuralgic world of politics, politicians are less and less inclined to have rows, so they will self-censor. And as a result, we're back to this thing of everybody sounding the same and saying the same. And what Mark Drakeford said, and what we said in our letter, is long-established Welsh government policy. So, why is it controversial for the Finance Minister and the Welsh Government to set out long-established Welsh Government policy that the UK Internal Market Act goes against the devolution settlement. In fact, Mark Drakeford, when he was First Minister, launched a judicial review against Boris Johnson's government for introducing the Single Market Act. So I think the question should be reversed. Why isn't it that the Labour government is protecting that position and advancing that position?
So can you answer that question? Why are they protecting it?
I don't know. And that's why we need to make an argument, because we can't just simply let this go without defiance and without contention. I thought Paul Griffiths, the Deputy Leader of Monmouthshire, gave a very considered interview before Christmas on this with Vaughan Roderick on the Sunday Supplement programme, and he was making the point that, MPs, in particular, are under a lot of pressure to be able to show they've made a difference locally. And power has gone to the Welsh Government. Power is not directly in their hands. And so it's very attractive to them in something like the Pride in Place scheme that the Tories introduced as precedent of local MPs having a say locally. Now, I completely get that, because one of my frustrations as a local representative is that people don't understand political structures. And so they think that you have got a say on things locally and you have no executive power at all. People say to me, what have you done about the town centre? What the hell can I do about the town centre? I have no powers over the town centre. I'm elected to represent an area in a parliament to pass laws and to scrutinise. I can't run anything unless I'm in government. And even then, it's very complex. So I completely understand why MPs are keen to hold on to this local role they have to be able to have a local impact. It goes against our constitutional tradition, though. Local economic development policy is the responsibility of local authorities. They are elected to do that. That's the constitutional settlement we have. Regeneration policy is the role of the Welsh government, and the Tories did this with exasperating gerrymandering, where they just use political priorities to get funding. Rishi Sunak famously said in his leadership election how they got funding to Tunbridge Wells, one of the richest parts of England, because they could under this new system, because there was a Tory representative there. So what the Tories did was an absolute outrage. I think both constitutional vandalism and I think politically, not quite, I wouldn't say corrupt, but certainly amoral, and not in our traditions of the way we make decisions in this country. And I'm just flabbergasted that we've continued to do that. As well as being cutting across constitutional principles, it's also a really terrible way of spending money. This is a relatively small pot of money. For European, when I used to run a third sector organisation that was involved in spending European money, and the rules around that used to drive everybody crazy. But you look back at that time now and you think, well, at least there was a framework, a structure, an audit trail, objectives. You know where the money was going and why it was going and what strategic priorities it was contributing to. What is this contributing to? It's £2 million per local authority per year for a period, which runs against all their other funding streams. These denuded teams are having to double run funding applications for a tiny amount of money, which has been decided not by the elected accountable local authority, not being decided by the Welsh Government in tandem with their other regeneration policies, but by this bizarre process and structure. It's just really bad politics. Well, it seems to be attractive short-term politics to some. It's bad economics. It's bad constitutional practice. It's bad administration. And we should, we called it out when the Tories did it. Why are we not calling it out now? I just don't understand. I can see it's politically inconvenient, but surely we've got some intellectual consistency and some self-respect to say this is rubbish.
I was going to say, I remember when Levelling Up was announced, the Labour MPs on the other side of Parliament were up in arms about it. So, it's a fair point. I get that, do you think they are genuinely trying to hold on to power, though, Lee? Or are they just, and this is not an excuse, are they just blind to it? Are they just not thinking about devolution in the way they should be? That's not an excuse. I'm just trying to work out, do you think they are intentionally doing it, or are they subconsciously doing this?
I think it's more a point of wanting to have some relevance locally that they can point to something that they've done, which I completely understand. Given people's expectations, I think it's a broader trend in politics here, is that as politics has become weaker. Governments have become weaker. This has been a long-term trend. Multinational firms make decisions. Governments through austerity and through Brexit and through other things have become emasculated. The amount of public money at play at any one time is marginal. It's the discretion. Most of it is established and has spending associated with it. So the amount of money and the amount of decisions that can be influenced are increasingly on the margins. And when you were a backbench MP, particularly an opposition backbench MP, but a backbench MP anyway, your ability to be able to control things that happen in your constituency is very, very limited. So I can completely get why it's attractive to eke out a little bit of territory where MPs and Senedd members, we have a role in this too, are able to put their stamp on something. So I don't think it's mendacious at all. I just think it's not very well thought through.
I just want to take you back to the wording of the letter itself, Lee, which is the last paragraph starts, if this was being done by a Tory government, we would be calling for a judicial review. Why aren't you?
Because it's not been done by a Tory government, and it's a decision of the First Minister to negotiate a whole set of relationships with the party in power. And she has got to make a judgment about lots of things that she's asking Keir Starmer and the UK government for, and she has to pick her battles, and that's the judgment she's made. This is not a battle I think she's particularly picked on. She's picked on things in the budget. She's picked on things that, a lot of it's been happening behind the scenes. The repatriation of agriculture spending, for example. The UK government wanted to move on to a Barnett setting, which, meant we would have a massive cut in our farming spending to the per head of population, which is way below what we've been having under Brexit. Now, that was stopped without fanfare by negotiation by Eluned Morgan. The fact she's repatriated powers to Wales over the following up to the Levelling Up funding, the successor to European funding. That's not happening in Scotland. That's something she's negotiated to put that power back in the hand of Welsh ministers. That's a significant piece of political negotiation. So I think her view is she can't fight on every front, and I understand that judgment. But I think my view was, well, this isn't just about government to government. This is about the broader party, and this is about the Senedd. And I'm not subject to the conversations she has with the Prime Minister. I don't have to make the decisions she has to make about which battles do I pick. We're defending a broader principle. And this is not just a government to government relationship. This is a parliament to parliament relationship, and we as people in Parliament have views on this. And as I say, I have a 30-year history on fighting for devolution. I'm simply not willing to turn the other cheek just because it's inconvenient in the short term.
But you've explained why Eluned Morgan and the Welsh government may not be seeking judicial review. But you, as a group of Senedd members, as a group of Labour backbenchers, you've stopped short of calling for judicial review in that letter. But you're consistently making arguments as to why you should. So I'm just interested. I think people see it as, well, we would be calling for this if it was the Tories, but we're not because it's Labour to Labour, and and that then is that inconvenient relationship. So would you call for a judicial review?
Well, I think Craig said, if I remember, about the letter on the episode you had talking about it, was this feels like a letter that's been written by a committee.
Yeah, I did say that. Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
which is, I think, an astute observation. And you when you've got that many people drafting a letter, you do have to reach a compromise. And we're not setting out to embarrass anybody. This was a letter directed at the Prime Minister, not at the First Minister. And so sometimes you leave things half said rather than fully said.
And would you put yourself forward as a member of that committee who would have written it perhaps one line stronger?
Well, that's the thing when you half say things. You allow people to use their intelligence to say the rest. You don't have to say it all explicitly.
Is that a backhanded compliment, Lee?
That's me trying,
he's
me
quite
trying to
good
learn
at
from my
this.
mistakes.
Can I pick up on that, Lee? And obviously what's underlying this and underlying the last sort of 12 months or more is the unpopularity of Keir Starmer's government. You referred earlier to his polling ratings. But I'm interested in the ups and downs of the relationship between the party in Wales, its elected members in Wales, and the government at UK level, and the PLP. It's gone through some testing times, hasn't it? And do you think that when it comes to crunch that everyone will be, sorry, horrible cliche phrase, singing from the same hymn sheet? Or do some of those fissures run deep now?
Well, the thing about devolution is we've got different hymn sheets. Because,
But you need to be on one page, don't you, for the Senedd elections?
Do we?
Or as near as damn it.
Do we? We've got different mandates, we've got different electoral cycles, we've got different political geographies. The whole point of devolution was that we were able to develop Welsh solutions for Welsh problems. Now, when you're working in a UK context, to a different mandate, to a Prime Minister rather than a First Minister, that's a different lens. You've got to think about the whole of the UK, you've got to think of it a different electorate, and that's the whole point of creating devolution. That's literally why we created it. So to then turn around and say, well, let's go back to this old prism where we have to have a unitary view of what political parties say, I think kind of misses the whole point of what the political project we were trying to create here.
I think the point I was trying to make is that I don't think that we've been 6 months out from an election where relationships seem as fraught as they do at the moment.
Well, I think there's a broader point here, which is that I don't think there's ever been a very successful attempt in any of the parties to develop good relationships, a common project between the representatives in Wales and the representatives in Westminster. Craig will know when the Conservatives were in power, there were significant differences between the Welsh group in the Senedd and the Welsh MPs in Parliament. Some of that is just inevitable because, as I say, you're working to different rhythms. And you and I both know, Jo, having worked in Westminster, that place is a hothouse. And whatever is dominating the village gossip that week is all everyone's thinking about. Now, we're not far from that.
And I would say, didn't want to interrupt you, but I think some of the testiest times I had as a special advisor were during Labour governments at Westminster, not during Tory ones.
And some of that's, let's just be grown up about this. That's how it should be. That's how governments work. This is why I get really frustrated with the whole political conventional media narrative, which is, I was sort of chiding you all about earlier, really, this idea that, this is creating a row at the wrong time. That's not the way we should look at this. Politics is about contesting things. We make progress through testing ideas, through painful compromise and progress. That's how we've always made progress. And that is always difficult. It's always tension. That's how in a democratic society you achieve change. You have trade-offs. You put things through the stress test. And that strains relationships. Of course it does. But that is the nature in a very complex society of democratic government and politics. And that's, it doesn't go with the Punch and Judy nature of media coverage where you have to have, a drama of this person's arguing with that person, therefore it's a bad thing. Let's just relax about that. There's disagreement here. There's clearly disagreement, and that's healthy. And we've got to work that through. I don't think we've done a good enough job. I think this is where your question earlier about reflection on the Mark Drakeford government. I've been trying to reflect on this myself. I think one of the things we failed, and I take my part in this as a minister in the Mark Drakeford government, was to bring along the MPs with us in the political project we were advancing. And I think what's tended to happen, there's been a little bit of a culture of whoever is in power in any particular place, their rules apply. So when we were in power in Wales and the Westminster MPs were in opposition, there's lots of stuff we did they weren't very happy with, but they had to suck it up because we were in power. And now, the gloves on the other foot is one of my favourite little malproposals. And I think the same is in reverse. And I think, you can do it like that. I'm not sure that's the best way to do it. And I've said to a number of MPs since the Labour government's come into power, one thing we've never done is to say, what's our common ask here? Because you see, regional lobbies from other parts of the UK, the northern MPs or the northwest, whatever, and they will broadly say, here are 2 or 3 things that we're going to get together and we're going to push for. And we're terrible at that. We don't do that. And I dare say, if the Welsh MPs and the Welsh Labour group, and this is true of any party that operates in both parliaments, were to make more of an effort to say, what are our common points we can push on here, we would have, I think, a better relationship and probably a better success at getting wins out of the UK government. But, we're 26 years into a new democracy, a new political culture, and this is all still bedding in. These are relationships. These are trade-offs that are still very, very young in their development. And I think we're learning and making mistakes as we go.
You talked about disagreement and disagreement being good, and I agree with you, Lee. I think, when you can only test an idea, you can only find its flaws, and you can only sort of work out how you're going to move forward. If you do try and push it to the limits, let's take that premise that disagreement is okay and it works. Was it the messaging that was wrong in advance of the last general election? We were always told you can have 2 governments at both ends of the M4 working together. That's not happening, it would appear, based on this disagreement. If disagreement's okay, was it that messaging that was slightly offline?
Well, I think it's been commented a lot by civil servants and people close to Whitehall. They've said that this government is the least well-prepared government they've ever come across coming into office, and in a sense, that slogan kind of reflects that, really, Craig, isn't it? Because it's a pretty superficial slogan, isn't it?
Yeah.
But
get Brexit done, yeah.
When that's all you've got, that's all you've got. And I think it reflects the fact that there wasn't, back to my earlier point, about not enough of an effort at trying to reconcile differences and agree a common way forward. So when we got to the general election, we didn't have a common set of things we could say, right, these are the things we're going to deliver for Wales, or these are the things we're going to push for Wales. So we end back with these trite kind of lines about partnership in power. And of course, 2 Labour government working together is better than working with a Tory government. I only worked with a Tory government and they were bloody awful to deal with. And the relationship with the UK government now under Labour is much, much, much better. All the colleagues I work with tell me that. Your starting point of the conversation, there are exceptions, obviously, but the starting point of the conversation is, okay, we get where you're coming from, we get what you're trying to do, how can we work this out? Don't always succeed. You have different pressures, you have different pulls, but it's just a better relationship. But it's always going to be a contested relationship because we're trying to do different things. And I think as part of us as a democracy coming to terms of what semi-federalism means and looks like, and what it means and looks like is different parts of the country doing different things and being okay with that. But I still think that's still quite a novel idea for our political culture.
Just for reference, working for a backbench Conservative MS in the Senedd didn't make conversing with a Conservative UK government minister any easier either, to be clear. They were just as difficult to engage with.
They all hated each other.
What was to that point, what was fascinating about, I was on the Labour bus for most of the general election campaign, and because of the narrative and the electoral politics of a UK-wide election, you had, a potential Labour number 10 team all sort of walking on eggshells whether they agreed over something that the Welsh government were doing at the same time, and they wouldn't say yes, we love it, because then they would be denounced by a certain part of the press about it, and they wouldn't say no, I hate it, because then everyone would write, well, it's Labour infighting and it's a total row. So it's sort of like, it is that balance of relationship is interesting. And Labour was sort of afraid of pointing to successes that the Welsh government had along that line, rather than just sort of trying to pretend it never happened in the first place. I just want to talk a little bit more about that relationship, because what is the backbench relationship now going into the May elections? The Welsh Labour relationship with Eluned Morgan as a First Minister, and Jo Stevens as a Welsh secretary, who I think you've described as previously as not quite being sort of full throttle when it comes to treating Wales a bit more differently, doing things, because they are the interests of Wales rather than the UK as a whole.
Well, Jo Stevens is a classic example of a unionist politician. She's not somebody who believes in devolution particularly. She's from very close to the English border in North East Wales. Her politics are the politics of many people in the Labour history. Neil Kinnock, Mairead Bevan. It's a proud tradition in Labour thinking where they essentially think there shouldn't be differences, and I don't agree with that, and neither do most people in Wales, by the way. But that's her sincere view, and I understand that view. I mean, it's a reasonable view. It's just not Labour policy. So I find it quite peculiar, really, that I think. I don't mean to make that personal because I don't really know Jo, and I've always had cordial relationships with her. But she is, probably the most anti-devolution Labour Welsh secretary we've had since George Thomas. So I'm not really sure what the political strategy behind that is, though, because we are now going into a period where we will obviously come together as the election gets closer. That's what parties do. The only thing that makes you makes you turn fire on others, the only thing that makes you have common cause your own side most is being attacked by the opposition. So that's just the psychology of political parties. I guess the tactical and strategic dilemma for MPs is once the election's out of the way, they're then going to be thinking about their own election, and they're if the polls remain as they are, they're not going to have a Labour government in Cardiff to be dealing with. They may well be relieved by that in the short term, just like I'm, quite relieved there isn't a Labour council in Carmarthenshire sometimes, because it means I can criticise them. I'm not blamed for the decisions they make, which I have no control over. So I can completely understand where MPs are coming from, and there'll be some short-term upside to them from that for sure. But the idea that you're then going to have some kind of relationship with the government is just going to be a free hit for them, I think is naive. And one of the things I do think, I've been reflecting on this over Christmas, is that for all the criticisms there are of Welsh Labour's record in power over a very long time, and there are good things we can point to and there are bad things we can point to, inevitably, I do think that people are going to look back with historic lens and be kinder to us than our contemporaries are. And I think if we do relinquish power, both the opposition will realise how hard it is to be in government, and there are no easy trade-offs which you can do in opposition. So I think they will start to realise that what they've been saying about us is now being said about them. But also I think MPs may start to think, actually, they weren't so bad after all, and as frustrated as we got with them, we missed having a Labour government in Cardiff. So careful what you wish for, I would say, to both our internal critics and our external critics.
I think it's interesting you make the point both about the MPs but also the opposition parties. It was a point I made to Fiona Piodworth. I don't know if you heard that episode, but said, whatever you think it's going to be like, it's going to be much worse, much harder, because you can't prepare for it, can you? But I want to pick up on something you said about the MPs and looking forward to May's election.
Me too.
We've got a new voting system. I don't like some bits of the new voting system, but it's what we've got. It also means coalitions, pacts, all of those kind of things, cooperation agreements, whatever, are going to be part and parcel. But as someone who was involved in the 2007 coalition negotiations and still have the scars on my back from the internal party process, and just the sheer ferocity, I guess, of the reaction from some of the MPs then, and the horrible insults, etc. And people will remember that Rodri Morgan had his heart attack not long after that special
But you didn't call
conference.
a heart attack at the time.
Well, we didn't know in the first day, but we learned afterwards. Thanks for that reminder.
It works both ways, Jo.
But it strikes me that if Labour do badly, third in the polls at the moment, who knows? But if Labour do badly, the PLP in particular might be in intensely disapproving of going into any kind of agreement with Plaid Cymru, for example, especially as a junior partner. I think they lived with it in the end because it was a Labour-led coalition. So country before party, or is that just a pipe dream? Because I can feel and sense some real animosity from the other end of the
Well,
M4.
look, the Conservatives and the Liberals in the Assembly, as it was then, didn't like the coalition government in London. They were making decisions on austerity and other things that, had a profound effect on the performance of the parties in Wales. That's the nature of, a multi-level governance. If you're part of a single party with operating at different levels, you're going to have tensions and disagreements. That is just, we just need to get used to that and stop clutching our pearls every time there's a manifestation of it. So, yes, of course, MPs of any party will take a view on what their party's doing at one end of the M4 or other. That's show business.
I'm thinking more about just a special conference and actually providing stable government. We've heard cabinet members talk about this a lot.
Contextualize it. We shouldn't be surprised that when the cycle shifts, when it's Westminster's time to face an election, and Cardiff's had theirs, or the reverse, there are different pressures at play, and then there are different biases that come into mind. I find it very hard to see the psychology. I don't want to write the next election result. Only idiots predict elections. There are a range of scenarios that are plausible, and it's to play for. So I do not want to give an impression that I think the result is set. I don't think it's set. But in the interest of playing along with the scenario you suggest, if Labour get the kind of result that the polls have been suggesting through all of last year, then that's going to be a psychological trauma for the Labour Party. So the idea that they are, and depending who ends up in the Labour group, and you look at the list of candidates, can be a very different character to the groups and the group that have gone before it. Plus, as you say, you can have a Welsh Executive Committee and a National Executive Committee at the Labour level who are going to be thinking about the next election and wanting to create a bit of distance to the Welsh Government so they can create some political space to frame their own arguments. That's all perfectly understandable and conventional political operation. That is going to make it hard, I think. I think Plaid Cymru their preference is for a minority government in any event. They don't want to be in power with Labour. I guess what's going to be different, again, this is the new psychology for all of us of what a new Senedd looks like with the new arithmetic and the new numbers. Because until now, Labour's never had a majority, but we've always been able to get a budget through with the other parties abstaining because we had 29 or 30 votes. And so you didn't need Plaid Cymru or the Liberals to vote with you. If they abstained, we had more votes than anybody else. We could get a budget through. That's not going to be the case in a new Senedd. If Plaid Cymru or Reform are the largest party, but not a majority party, it's not going to be enough just to get the opposition parties to abstain. They're going to have to get them to actively vote in favour of a budget. That's never happened before. So I think any party that takes over the leadership of government is going to have a very difficult time getting any budget passed. So I think forming a government is going to be hard for anyone. Sustaining a government is going to be very hard for anyone. Passing a budget year after year with those kind of different dynamics is going to be very, very testing. There's uncharted waters. And I think we're in for a very turbulent period in Welsh politics.
Well, you say there, Lee, that you don't want to predict the outcome of the upcoming May election. So I'll frame it in this way. At the end of Welsh Labour's season, do you think they'll have fared better or worse than the Scarlets will have fared in their season?
Well, this is one of the reasons why I'm like a terrible politician, because I have no interest in sport at all, and don't follow it. So people, say to me, assuming I'm a Llanelli rugby fan, I've got no clue. There are enough armchair sporting referees in Llanelli. They don't need another one.
My observation, Ollie, would be that based on the current situation of Welsh rugby, Llanelli Scarlets simply existing in a year
Well,
or
that's
so's time
true.
would be an achievement. I don't know if you want to make a similar comparison to Welsh Labour, Lee.
I think we're living through extraordinary times. How governable is the UK? We've had a series of prime ministers at the UK level. We may, who knows what the next 12 months holds? We may have more. Whoever is in government is facing the most extraordinary jaw of doom of rising pressures for spending and a lower ability to raise additional funding and an appetite from the bond market to try and hem them in as much as they possibly can, and a very febrile politics. So I think we are living, if we take a step back, I think historically we are living through very, very difficult times. Ever since the 2008 crash, our politics has been reset and it still hasn't settled. And so a devolved election within that context, when being in power for so long, is going to be very, very testing indeed. I think, we can go into that election with our head held high of what we have achieved. And, I don't think, this line of we just don't tell people enough what we've done. I just think that's rubbish. That's not the way people deal with democratic progress. But we have done a bunch of things which won't get recognised, but nonetheless stand on their merits. We have a £4 billion school building programme that they simply don't have in England. You go to my constituency, there are new schools everywhere. That's extraordinary. We have brand new trains and a new metro system. That hasn't happened by accident. That's been an extraordinary act of delivery by the Welsh Government, started by Carwyn Jones, big decision made then, and taken forward by others. There's a whole series of things that we've done that have made a really big difference that whether we get credit for it or not, it remains to be seen. The sour public mood suggests we're not at the moment. But it doesn't mean we haven't done good things. We have done good things. And whoever is in a position to form a government next time is going to face the most almighty storm.
Can I ask then? So, Lee, post-May, what will you be doing?
That's a good question. It's still keeping me awake at night. I've got no idea. I know I'm standing down from politics after 10 years because I think 10 years is enough. It's always tempting to try and want to stay, and I think that's a mistake. So that's a personal decision I've made. I don't know what I'm going to do. I want to try and do something else. I've done a bunch of different things. When I get bored, I want to do something else. And so I don't know. And that's part of the challenge, is I've got to try and find something. So, if anybody knows of anything, please bear me in mind.
Lots of podcasts.
I've got money in podcasts.
Yeah, don't we know it?
Perhaps you've got more time to go and watch the Scarlets, and then it'll all work out. And then I can ask you the same question again next year. Lovely. Lee Waters, member of the Senedd for Llanelli, thank you very much for joining us on Senedd Sources.
Nice to speak to you.
Well, thanks, Lee. Thanks, Joe. And thanks, Craig. Press subscribe on your podcast app. Why not make it your New Year's resolution? And you can find us to watch on YouTube as well. And we'll drop into your feeds every week with the latest on Welsh politics and policy making. Thanks for listening. And we'll talk with you again next week.